Live. This is Foreign and Domestic Unfiltered, episode number 14. It's been a while since I've been on doing anything. I've been out living my life. Thankfully, Ramon held down the fort, hopped on a couple times. And man,
That's what I do.
I'm hearing myself. Where's that coming from?
I don't know, man. Is it? Oh, that better?
Yeah, much better.
All right, there we go. Apologies, folks. Technical difficulties. We're not together right now. If you can't tell, I'm in my attic. Patter is in his office. We are attempting, bring some new formats here, and now you get to see both of our beautiful faces in our own homes. Can you hear me?
Yep. That's what it is. But yeah, we're going to get into some of the larger topics, specifically actually one in particular, which is what's going on in Palestine and Israel right now. It's a topic that we've kind of touched on in previous episodes, but there's a serious thing going on there at the moment that the world is watching on, and I want us to get into it and really talk about it and what's at the crux of what's going on. But before we do that, Ramon's going to hit us with some quick hits for the week, and we can chew it up a bit.
Oh, baby, folks, just to, close up the loop on just wonderful story. I enjoyed it the last time that we touched on these gentlemen. The Matt Gaetz saga is closing. It's the second act is coming to an end because today, Joel Greenberg, a former confidant of Representative Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida, admitted in court papers on Friday to an array of federal crimes, including sex trafficking of a minor, and agreed to cooperate with the Justice Department investigations. So, hit me with the...
Oh, yeah. We're even working in some... Hold on, is it playing? Can I hear it? Did it play?
I can't tell.
I can't tell. Well, yeah. What was it? What was the specifics on that one again? It was what did it say?
Yeah, it was just the old classic. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Yeah.
So Matt Gaetz, like I said, all the speculation that we had around it earlier, what did we say? I believe we said May 31st.
Yep.
I think that's where we set the line at, and we were both picking under.
Yep.
So nailed it. I don't know, hey, pay me out, Johnny, pay it up because it's coming. It's coming, folks. Okay. If this guy is already saying, oh yeah, I'll cooperate, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's the only person they're looking at is Gaetz. Like, he is the big fish. We talked about it before. Maybe Roger Stone or someone else comes into play, but come on. Like, this is the guy. It's a congressman. This is a career case type shit for people in the Justice Department, especially for whoever the head prosecutors are. You know what I mean? This is the kind of things that these people put under their belt to make them, to make themselves out as, people who fight corruption and, don't have issues with taking out people that are actually in the halls of power. So, big fish, and we'll just keep tuned to that. I just wanted to drop that on you guys real quick.
Question for you. Do you think Greenberg, what sort of, you think he's looking at some probation, some minimum security time, or what? Like with the charges that has been brought, what sort of plea do you think he'll be able to weasel himself into?
I mean, it all hinges on, in my opinion, it all hinges on how badly the Justice Department wants Gaetz or whoever else might be linked to this. Because if he gives up, and mind you, in this article I'm reading here, it's saying that he's facing 12 years in prison. That's what, after the guilty plea, what he's looking at. So, and then also remember, folks, like in these types of situations where a person pleads guilty, and like I said before, they could use racketeering charges as this a crime of sex trafficking crossing state lines. Mm-hmm. If at any moment the prosecution deems that he is not being fully cooperative or is not giving up every person like he agreed to under the agreement, those numbers go up. Yeah. So 12 years is looking at what he's, he might get something shorter than that, but I believe at the outset of this, when they were like listing off all of his grand jury indictments, like he was looking at dozens of years.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it all depends on who he serves up. We'll see. I mean, you obviously don't want to see a scumbag like this only go do a few years or something. Yeah. Because it's not like the sex trafficking stuff aside, just the level of like just general corruption. You know what I mean? Like it leaves a bad taste in people's mouths when you see people get elected to positions of power. They do super wild stuff with the power, mm-hmm. and then get a slap on the wrist, or like go do like house arrest time.
Yeah,
or go to Club Fed for a year where they have like a cell phone and satellite cable in their jail cell, eating like hot meal, steakums and shit. You know, nobody likes to see that.
Well, I wonder if there's any way there's possible charges that haven't been leaked, or if there's anything juicier underneath it that we don't know about yet, or is it just straight up what has been already in the kind of public eye so far? And that's why, you know, if it's just Gates who the big fish is, that's great, but I'm hoping there's some other weasels that might be involved, that might be dragged into this as well. Or maybe Gates will start flipping on people. That would be real nice.
Right. And I mean, and that's the thing, right? Like, if I think about it logically, there probably isn't anyone bigger than Gates could flip on, because remember, he's generally disliked and shunned by the rest of his party. So like, it's not like he was like rubbing shoulders with more powerful Republicans than him doing wild stuff. It seems like he like very much wasn't allowed in the club in the first place.
I don't know. Wasn't he at like baseball?
Like Jim Jordan?
Well, he was at baseball games with the president and Kevin McCarthy and a bunch of the top brass, at least last year. I don't know if there's been a distancing over the last year or so, but he was definitely within that club for a long, long time. And as he was shown his support of Trump, you know, I think he got a lot of airtime through that, but I don't know. Yeah, I know that he was ostracized by a lot of the party, but
I was gonna say none of those people you just listed came to his defense.
Right.
So here's my look on it is like, sure, he was chummy with McCarthy and Trump, but largely that was Gates bootlicking. That wasn't like a reciprocating relationship. Right. You know what I mean? So, and again, like especially for someone like McCarthy, that's, in my opinion, he's trying to, you know, brand himself. He's trying to ally himself with the more extreme folks in his party so that he has that defense. I mean, Look at Liz Cheney.
True.
You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of how the game gets played in the Republican Party, where you have these vicious, insane people to your right, and you're already super far right. And there's people even wilder than you. And, you know, except Gates is like, oh, weed should be legal. But other than that, you know, vicious right-wing people. You gotta snug up to him a little bit, because like I said, it's like we always talked about, some fucking like neo-Nazi used car dealer can primary you with no problem, and like 2 years later beat you, or like Tommy Tuberville or somebody. Like you're constantly vulnerable in the Republican Party if you do not show you can chug a gallon of the Kool-Aid.
Well put.
It is what it is. Like on a realpolitik level.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And what I'm glad that this is kind of coming to a head, because it was kind of one of those things, like we discussed it, you know, it was a couple months ago now. And I know you don't want to rush anything when you're making sure you have the right charges and whatnot, but I just want him gone. I just want him kind of out of there, and I'd rather be seeing him in an orange jumpsuit than in his little, you know, fucking pinstripe suit.
His blue pinstripes,
his threaded eyebrows, or whatever the hell he was going on there.
Oh man.
But, yeah. And then the other quick hit, which, you know, we have to touch on, just because I'm fully vaccinated, by the way, so, you know, this is a good segue into what we're going to talk about. But the CDC yesterday, was it yesterday?
Yep.
Early yesterday, the new guidance now is, if you've been vaccinated, you know, whether you're indoors or outdoors, you do not have to wear a mask. And I think they, you know, were clear to note that, like, in certain facilities, like, you know, hospitals, you know, elder care homes and stuff, you know, still, you know,
I think airports
too. Yeah. You know, but this is another positive sign. You know, me personally, I think the data has been there for the efficacy of of the vaccines in terms of, how it, once you have the vaccine, whether it spreads or the ability to spread the coronavirus, but also just how well it was working and holding up against the various variants as well. So I think it was one of those things. I thought it was coming. I thought it may come sooner. But yeah, it's a positive sign. And I think it, with the numbers going down across the board, hospital rates dropping, I think it's 117 million people are now vaccinated. So, again, that's well below. I think they need another 100 million to get to that magic number that they say is, going to be herd immunity. But I'm of the thought that magic number, like, nobody actually knows. Some say it's 70%, some say it's 90%. I think if you get the people who, are going to get vaccinated, I think, a guidance like this potentially may get more people vaccinated too. And some people are guessing that, the reason that they're bringing this out is to get another push of people to get vaccinated.
Right.
As
trying to reverse engineer.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, it's a positive thing. And, like I said, I think we're on the other side of this. Obviously, what's happening in India, we talked about, they're in the thick of it right now. But I guess for America and for the world, it's good because, again, America then has a better ability to, give some vaccine aid to other places once we get to that point where we're opening up and things are kind of back to normal-ish.
Right. So my take on it is, sure, I want shit to go back to normal too. And the only real hard critique I have of this is the same. So, rewind, consider the way that we were discussing school openings and all the other stuff all throughout the course of this pandemic, where we constantly heard the refrain on the federal level, federal politicians saying, oh, there's no one size fits all. State politicians saying that about their counties. There's no one size fits all. And, for example, you have Cuomo came right out yesterday and said, we'll be doing our own review of the CDC recommendation and how when that will fit for New York. That's another thing that people need to remember is mask mandates are not federally mandated. Right. And I feel like a lot of people have lost that part of the fact pattern on this, but just because the CDC is saying it, the fact that not every state is that 58, I believe we're at 58% of all American adults are vaccinated now or something like that. That's not proportionate. You know what I mean? So I think it's like Mississippi, Tennessee. There's a few states that are severely lagging. And obviously those red state governors have no problem just being like, oh, CDC said it.
Right.
I'm at 25%. Don't give a shit. Don't care.
Right.
So this is actually very similar to the kind of things that we criticized about blanket policy all throughout the course of this. So that's one critique I have where this feels like a very rushed thing. Not saying that we're not there yet, whatever, because again, like we were talking about offline, something that I've been arguing about for a long time. I'm not a scientist. This isn't medical advice or anything, but there has to be a significant portion of the population that has antibodies.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I haven't read the full CDC breakdown of what their logic is on this, but I'm sure that has to be incorporated at some point because it is a sort of a huge reversal for them to be talking about this magic, 65, 70% is what they wanted to achieve, a conceived version of herd immunity and only be at 58 and lift now.
Right.
So, and I'm kind of inferring that from what they're saying.
And I would say as well, though, it's clear that obviously some parts of the country are going to adopt CDC guidelines and even vaccinations, more heavily than others. But, let's take New York, for example. Let's take actually Schenectady County, for example, which I believe is number 2 in New York for getting vaccinated as of now. I think when you see the transmission rates, you see the hospital rates, all of those things trending down, death rates, all of that then, creates an outlook for the rest of the state, the country, where, okay, they seem to be doing well. These are the steps that they took. Hospital rates are going down. It almost forces the hand then of the places that have not. So places like Mississippi, if they're still dealing with that and they still don't have all these people vaccinated, then, it's clear that, in order to get to that point, there'll be the adaptability rate of, vaccines and the correct processes will be done there far quicker now as other places open up with higher vaccination rates. I think that's where I see it as a positive, no matter what it's like in other areas of the country. I think, we're at a point now where we know that it works. The vaccination I'm talking about, we know that it's been effective in driving numbers down in terms of catching it, hospitalizations, all of that, and in turn, I'm not so much worried about getting to that magic number of herd immunity. I think what's more important is getting back open again, and then actually seeing, how the vaccination rollout has affected everyone who's now back to normal. I personally think that, again, this is not medical advice either, that once we're all back out and about, there won't be a significant increase either way. And then that'll force the hand of other places and encourage people.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't want again, these are just like technical critiques of what I see the CDC do, what I've seen them do. Because like we said before, we were talking again offline, like they had just declared that, this is an airborne virus like a month ago. There was a fucking boatload of science showing that way earlier than they declared it. So it's interesting to see them lag in some other areas in regards, have the issues with masks being required or not early on in the pandemic, like all of this movement around it. And I get it, science is moving all the time, but it's just, it's easy for me to, all right, now that it seems like the crisis is over in America, like now for me personally, I can shift back into, okay, I'm going to go back to being normally, healthily skeptical of all government organizations and want to do my own checking back on what they're saying, why they're saying things. And it's certainly very hard to try to sort of put off the fact that, we have a bunch of other issues going on in this country, non-COVID related, that would be super helped by an early adoption of relinquishing the mask policy. Like, for example, all this perceived labor shortage, what I talked about last week on the live stream, this policy certainly helps in that regard, because a big issue, part of those intangibles I was listing before with like labor shortages, like a lot of people were scared. There's a ton of people. I saw a bunch of interviews of people on the street, a bunch of media organizations like, the mask mandate's lifted. How do you feel about that? A ton of people were like, hey, yeah, took their shit off right there.
Yeah.
And then there were a handful of people who were like, I'm going to keep wearing mine and just see what happens. You know what I mean? So what we're talking about is peeling away layers of fear, right? And that's a good thing. That's always a good thing. But I'm just saying, when I always, we can't forget the history of, like I said, plenty of people at CDC did a bunch of great work, of course, across the course of this pandemic, all these other organizations. But we can't forget the fact that, just the same way that, for example, Cuomo leaned on his own health officials and made them kind of do what he wanted. Those things do happen on the federal level too. So all I'm saying is there could be some people leaning on the CDC right now and being like, okay, well, this would help us right now. We're pretty close. Let's work this out and, let's just do it. Yeah. Because there are people who are willing to take a chance. At the end of the day, what we're talking about here, even if there was like some magic number that we would reach where it's like, okay, now's the time, at the end of the day, it is arbitrary. You don't know what's going to happen. Yep. You don't, even if you reach that number. So again, I have no problem with it, but all I'm saying is I don't want, it bothers me that I see it being discussed without the valence of this is the CDC we're talking about here, that, like, for example, like I trust the World Health Organization much more. And it just in my opinion, right. You know what I mean? And obviously they're not in this country, but it just, again, it's hard to not attach those things for me to be like, okay, I'm going to look into what they're saying and dig into, why it is what they're saying.
Yeah, well, that's fair. And I mean, if anything, all of this has taught us is to take a lot of what we see and hear with a grain of salt. And the skepticism is going to be there from the people that were critical anyway. Right. And people who are vaccinated or already have an optimistic outlook on going on from here and getting outside. I mean, I know after I got my second shot Monday, there was a kind of a bit of a weight lifted on me. It allows me to travel to Ireland in July and not have to do any extra quarantining when I'm there. And I think that shit like that as well is going to force people's hand in order to get vaccinated too.
Travel, absolutely.
Travel, absolutely. Yeah. And they have, it's not necessarily a passport, but there's places now where you have to show that you've been vaccinated in order to get into certain places. And I'm okay with that. I'm sorry. It's just you wanna play the game, then you have to get involved. So that's where I'm at with it. So
yeah, what is it, like concerts, big venues, stuff like that? I believe I saw Delta was the first major American company that is requiring all new employees to be vaccinated. They're not requiring their current employees. So that's going to be interesting how that works out too on the labor side for employment and everything. This is going to be probably somewhat of a headache for like HHS people, HIPAA, all kind of stuff like that. Like they're going to have to work all this out because again, now that we're at the point where the crisis is over, we have to kind of readjust back to like, okay, where's the policy? Because there is no policy behind all this. Largely, when you're talking about vaccination requirements, it's all in the arena of the private industry right now.
Well, most schools. I mean, when I was, signing up for schools over here and stuff, I had to have all my vaccinations, that we all get. Those were all things that were required for me to be able to enroll in these places. So there's no real change.
Right, but I'm saying for adults though, not for like people in their early 20s or kids. Sure. I'm saying for adults who are the majority of the vaccinated population for now. Arguably all of it. Yeah. So, that's going to be the interesting thing to roll out here where there's going to be fights, and especially around unions too, because that's a big reason why that Delta didn't require it for current employees, because you're going to have unions that fight back about this. Remember what we talked about before, like teachers unions, nurses unions, firefighter unions, where they were polled. And again, this is what I referred to this. It was like a month and a half ago. We're gonna hit a wall because they were polled. About 40% of people said they didn't want to get the vaccine.
Yeah.
Either they didn't want to get it or they weren't going to get it yet. So when you have that kind of a resistance, if labor's already in this position where it's being withheld at a significant level, how can you, as a private organization or even a public organization like a school or a fire department that's employing people, try to put that benchmark in if you are going to face a significant number of loss of employment? That's a real thing that's happening right now where they have to make these considerations. You saw McDonald's recently was like, hey, I'm going to boost wages. That's real pressure from the labor market. We haven't seen this in America in a long time. So it's going to be interesting how these different dichotomies, like these three little triangle circles intersecting to make this, where the policy shakes out. So,
there's no way to really enforce this. So it's going to be, down to local and town, cities and private businesses to enforce, whether or not people will wear masks. That's up to them. Right. All right, so let's get into our main topic, I think, without any further ado. So this is kind of it's been something that I've always thought of for decades now, and for as long as I can remember. And I've spoken to you before how the Palestinians and the Irish had a lot of similarities and a lot of solidarity with one another through the lens of fighting an oppressor. And let me just preface everything that I say or everything that I'm going to discuss is that, Zionism is not Judaism. You know what I mean? It's much like, Islamic extremism is not Islam.
There's Christian Zionists.
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the imperialist Zionist regime that continues to minimize and, out and out ethnic cleanse the Palestinians, both in Israel now, where there's 20% of the population are Palestinian, and obviously in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. But just to talk specifically about, the recent escalation of all this, I think we can talk about in late April, I believe, Israeli police began to form nightly barricades at the Damascus Gate. That's a very popular gathering place in East Jerusalem, especially during Ramadan. And that's something important to recognize as well. All of this is taking place under, the umbrella of Ramadan closing out, which, we all know the significance and the importance of Ramadan to Muslims. It's their holy time. And the move really prompted protests from the Palestinians because, it's hard to forget that, they're an occupied place. Much less hard to forget when in one of these holy sites during these holy times, they increase barricades. It's certainly a provocation as I see it. And I think that's what the Palestinians saw as well. So there was protests that came from that, and after several weeks of that, of nearly nightly protests, Israeli police now, mind you, were facing unarmed Palestinian youths that they would remove from the barricades, and that just continued to simmer and simmer and simmer, and then obviously it gets to the point where there's been live ammunition used. For a lot of times, it was rubber bullets. There's reports that a lot of the shots that were being shot, they were very specific. They're armor-coated rubber bullets too. They're not just, you think of rubber bullets. I mean, there's damage that can be done with them. But a lot of the shots were specific to the left side of the chest and the face. So with that, and I'll try my best to continue the timeline as accurately as I've gathered. Obviously, I'm not there, but with this as well, the continuing far-right activists from the Israel side, as well as the settlers, continue to do what they do, which is, occupy land that they see as we talked about, as some sort of manifest destiny to them, where they can just grab settlements that they've been bolstered by a Bibi government that, and also a Trump government that didn't see them as illegal occupations and illegal settlements. So you might ask, why are Palestinians facing eviction, specifically in this Sheikh Jarrah region? It's about 1 kilometer north of Jerusalem. And, to bring it all the way back, in 1948, during the war that followed Israel's declaration of statehood, Jordan took ownership of that area along with the rest of East Jerusalem. And about 700,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes during that war in an event known as Nakba, or catastrophe. And neighboring countries absorbed hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees. And Jordan ultimately decided to use that land, now known as Sheikh Jarrah, to settle Palestinian refugees. So these people are already refugees. And they built homes there for about 28 Palestinian families in 1956. Now, bear with me as I continue to kind of paint the picture here of what happened at Sheikh Jarrah most recently. But recently, they faced new uncertainty after Israel took over all of East Jerusalem. And that was in violation, mind you, of international law during the Six-Day War. And that was in 1967. I think anybody who's followed Israel and Palestine knows kind of the story of how Palestinian territory has been minimized from a place that it was in 1948 to where it is now, where it's basically been minimized to the West Bank and Gaza Strip. So most recently, in 2007, the Jewish Association sold the land to a settler group called Nahar Shimon, which is owned by a company called Nahalat Shimon International, and it's based in the US. They filed eviction proceedings against the Palestinians living on the land and succeeded in evicting Palestinians from 4 homes in 2008 and 2009. Jewish settlers moved in. Palestinian Sheikh Jarrah residents experienced frequent violence and provocation from these settlers. And over the subsequent 12 years, as court cases concerning 7 other houses dragged on, Sheikh Jarrah residents have held weekly non-violent protests against displacement. Now, in February of this year, the Jerusalem District Court rejected an appeal, ruled that the residents of the 4 houses, amounting to 6 families and 27 people, could be evicted. The families appealed, and the Israeli Supreme Court was scheduled to rule on their case this week, but delayed its decision in order to seek input from Israel's Attorney General. The court says it'll announce a new ruling date within 30 days in advance of the scheduling ruling. Young Palestinians from elsewhere in Jerusalem came to join the Sheikh Jarrah residents in protest, where they were met with violent police repression. Now, a lot of people are framing a lot of this as the evictions as ethnic cleansing, which, I'd essentially would agree with. This is not some sort of, private real estate dispute. You've settler organizations who insist on Jews' divine right to occupy the entire city of Jerusalem, which is incredible to me because, I've kind of broken down the timeline there of what has happened. And when we talk about timelines of divine right to live in any place, I mean, can we just throw all that shit out the window at this point?
Yeah, I mean, and that's why, I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy who did the media tour where he was pushing back against even the term eviction being used, I mean, he was totally correct. That implies that someone else had deed to it prior or owned it and, were renting to them or something. Mm-hmm. And the difference here is what they're saying is the state, they're basically claiming an eminent domain of the state over the property. It's not like it's some Israeli citizen or Jewish citizen. Mm-hmm. Who has some I have this deed from 1948. That's not what's happening.
Yeah,
that's not what's happening. And it's being framed that way when people discuss these court cases, and it's just completely off base. That's not what's happening. I mean, it's really shocking too when you consider that's the basis how far back they're reaching when you consider folks what was going on 4 years prior to 1948. Right. Yep. It was literally happening to them.
You can pick your date within the history books, of when you think you have divine right.
Right. But I'm saying literally Jews were being expelled in Poland.
Yeah.
And, all these Eastern European countries literally 4 years before they're reaching back. The current Israelis are reaching back to find precedent from these, and the thing is the treaties go both ways. Both sides claim they have, the domain of this because of X, Y, or Z treaty. And this is one of those situations where it's really frustrating for me because you hear the lay person talk about these things, right? And I would consider myself a lay person. I'm not a historian. I don't claim to have knowledge of archives of, all this shit that people are referring to. But at the end of the day, it's you're talking about families who've lived on these lands for over 30 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just on a moral, a human level, which that's really where the cross, the miscommunications happening between people who are in favor of Israel doing these things and people who aren't for the Palestinians.
Right.
Where it's we have to leave this insane legal arena behind. Mm-hmm. Where it's no, what we're talking about here is you're literally just, you're using the power of the state, the threat of the military, bulldozers, all this stuff to displace just normal families, right. Just people just living their lives. And if we can't have an agreement on that and what we claim is such an advanced civilization, then we have a huge fucking problem.
Right. And I mean,
that's not all the lip service we apply to Native American genocide, slavery, all these things you hear a lot of these right wingers talk about. And don't just let me frame this to right wingers too, right? Yeah. Because there's a ton of Democrats who are not down with this, but will not saying. And, that proves it, folks. If this is happening now in real time, all these correlations, and we'll get into it later, this is literally just colonialist genocide. What we did to Native Americans is what's happening here. The only difference is there's some more, like the technology, I guess, is a little closer for weapons of war. Like the gap isn't as big, but it's still the threat of America backing Israel is way more gigantic than anything we were doing on the Western frontier with Native Americans. Like, so it's kind of hard to compare those two things, but it's the best correlation I can draw for like what the layperson would understand.
Right. And just to button up, like again, why it has come to, I won't say even has come to a head because I can't even say that it has, but why you're seeing an increasing level of violence right now is of what happened at Alaska, which is, again, of religious significance to the Muslims. It's their third holiest site. You may have remembered back in 2017, Israelis set up metal detectors there, and that was another provocation that, really set things off as well. And it's really the last place of Palestinian Muslim sovereignty in the whole of Jerusalem now, you could argue, because they've been minimized that much. Again, against the backdrop of the uneasy occupation in the West Bank, ongoing attempts to displace the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, and now the Alaska Mosque, that was like the perfect combination for things to just escalate. And it's not the Palestinians that really escalated it. Obviously after everything that I've said there, it's clear that, if you're being oppressed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and everything that you believe in and everything that you're passionate about keeps getting minimized, or, if not even minimized, you're continuously reminded that you're under occupation. You hear of rockets coming from the Palestinian side, hundreds of rockets or whatever. And I think it's important to note that sounds, whoa, hundreds of rockets can certainly do damage, can certainly kill civilians, innocents, and it has. But the majority of them are rockets that you and I could make after watching a YouTube video. They're not sophisticated, a lot of them. And then you look at the response. And not to mention
the Iron Dome blocks 90%
exactly.
of them.
And then you look at the response, and it is not an equal response that's coming from the Israeli side. Was it one of the specific attacks from Israel killed 22 people, 9 of them children? Since it really kicked off properly last week, some of the images and some of the videos and some of the testimony coming out is just heart-wrenching. There's continued, increase in military operations yesterday and today, with Israel ready to, increase their ground presence as well, which, where is that going to lead it? Who knows? And it's just a really, really sad, and, it's, my heart goes out for the Palestinians, because for so long Israel have been given carte blanche without any sort of, detriment to them. They've been able to do this without anybody really reining them in. We talked about the ICC putting out a lawsuit against them, trying to prosecute them for war crimes. I don't have hope in that, because even amongst all that, you have the US and Blinken saying they had no right to do that. We know where Joe Biden stood for years and years and years on Israel. I had a video on my page the other day of Joe Biden on the floor talking about if there was no Israel, America would create an Israel in order to protect their interests in the region. And he said, and I quote, there's not $3 billion that we spend better than giving it to Israel. We've talked before about the massive, is it AI, the APAC here in the US? Mm-hmm. Very, very powerful PAC that protects those interests, all under the umbrella of trying to, again, get rid of the Palestinians and bring an end of days, as seen in their version of what's going to happen for religion there. It's It's all just
for context, folks. AIPAC's the American Israeli Political Action Committee. Like, consider the scope of that. Like, that doesn't exist for other countries.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's what the things that spawn out of AIPAC. You know, and we won't get into it because it's a huge tangent. But like, anti-BDS legislation, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, things that lefties in America have tried to do, movements they've tried to form to push back against this in some way. Because the thing is, there really is no real lever that voters and citizens in this country can wield against politicians that continue to support this horrifying regime and what they've done. You know, not even just Netanyahu, but just, again, in the historical context of it all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people have tried to do boycotts, all this stuff, and AIPAC, that organization, which has Democrats and Republicans in it, by the way, folks. Like, you know, it's just like the National Prayer Breakfast, all these things, where that's the only place you find bipartisanship anymore.
Right.
Anything around war or involving foreign policy or, you know, fiscal policy, that's a new thing that we're seeing some break on. But, you know, they're literally writing legislation up in states like I think Texas had it, Alabama, a few other southern states, where like you literally can't work for the school system, you can't work for any public agency that your paycheck comes from this state if you participate in BDS movements against Israel. I mean, that's and it's so ironic. Like, right wingers go on and on and on and on and on about free speech, and it's like protesting and boycotting things is like one of the main protections of the First Amendment. And they're just demolishing it for the sake of this, what we're talking about right now.
Right. And
not even for the sake of necessarily American hegemony, because you could still do all this stuff and fund Israel to the hill without doing that. But again, it's the impunity is the point.
Right.
The point is you're trying to set that precedent that no one will even say anything about what we're doing.
Right.
You know, that it just shows you the complete level of control and the dedication that America still has to colonialism.
Right. And you know what's ironic about all that is one of the things that really brought down apartheid in South Africa was the boycotting of South Africa. So you think of, you know, sports teams wouldn't play there. Obviously, business pulled out left, right, and center. And it was a big part of why you could have somebody like Nelson Mandela come into power, is because the country was kind of brought to its knees, or like I guess the white colonial country was brought to its knees by that sort of boycotting, which is ironic because, you know, you just listed a ton of instances now where there's an actual pushback against that same sort of, you know, approach by these Zionistic, you know, far right elements within the Israeli, and it's not even just the far right. I mean, you know, I spoke to you last night and I was saying, you know, where is it going to stop, and where's the shining light for these Palestinians in the region? And if anything, at least within the Israeli government, the distance between that is getting further, because you have more and more far right extremists getting elected in Israel. You don't have to do that many searches to see what's happening on the streets of places like Haifa, even close to Tel Aviv, where, again, like I said, 20% of all Israeli population are Palestinians. So, you know, they live there. They have the rights of an Israeli citizen. Getting pulled out of their cars, beaten on the streets. That is happening more and more over the last few days, and it's getting heightened. You have that extreme far right element. They're talking about soccer hooligans are getting involved in this, and it's building up to an almost civil war on the streets there. And again, you know, there's been plenty of pushback from American Jews about what's going on right now, which is good to see. There needs to be more of that. There's been an increased amount of pushback from at least this Congress. You have more and more Congress people coming on the record and you know, giving passionate speeches and talking about what's going on and what's wrong with what's happening, which it's crazy to say there's never been really an approach before where it has been accepted by at least Western media pushing back on it. And even the way it's framed within the media, I think we have to take a good look at. Again, we talked about yesterday when we had our chat that, is it really a conflict? Is it really a war when clearly one side is rocking with, high-powered, multi-million-dollar weaponry, and the majority of the protests and provocations, if you want to call them that, are, disenfranchised young men and women throwing stones and bottles and, and it's just crazy. And you don't, like I said, you don't have to search far to see instances of that, Zionist mentality within the region. And it's very sad. And it's something that I really hope that through all this, recent escalations and violence we're seeing, something will be done. But
just to touch on something you said there, I want to highlight. Like, again, you were like, "Is this a war?" No, it's not. And just like put this in perspective, folks. When you read your history books, sure, like Native American tribes rose up and fought against the American government. The numbers were extremely lopsided. None of those were referred to as wars. The actual battles that were fought on the days, like, so for example, we're coming off like the initial day of all this. I believe it was like 26 Palestinians got killed,
9 children,
and 9 children, and like I think 6 Israelis were killed, right? And as you see this escalate more and more, that gap between, like what you said, like proportionate response gets blown way out of proportion. In the 2014 Gaza war, over, I think it was like 2,200 Palestinians were killed. 80% of them were civilians. So let's also keep that in perspective, right? So when you hear these numbers coming out of the Netanyahu administration, which is really the only thing we have on the ground, it's that, and I forget the Gaza organization that also tracks the numbers, right? But what you got to understand is, like, Israel's leveling whole apartment complexes. So these numbers are going to lag. There's going to be huge numbers of just dead people that are going to be discovered over time. Yeah. I mean, we're talking about whole sections of towns being leveled, high rises, right? Yeah. So again, put it in that historical context. When this is in a history book 100 years from now, this isn't going to be called a fucking war. Right. All this series of things that have happened across the last couple decades, because that's when it really separated, like what you're saying, the increase in American military support and funding. Like, it got wildly out of control here. Israel is getting more and more bold. These aren't wars. That's not what this is. Right. Because first off, for a war to happen, you need to have 2 sovereign states. That's not the case right now. Okay. And second off, I want to call back to something that you said earlier, where the Palestinians that are within Israel are supposed to have equal rights. When you're not in Israel, you don't. Mm-hmm. So is within Israel proper, right? What Israelis consider Israel proper. So that's another thing that people have to understand for the context here. When you're in Gaza, when you're in some of these, green zones, whatever, I don't know what they're terming them, but when you're in those areas, you do not have the same rights as if you were living within Israel. Mm-hmm. You do not. And that's how there's a lot of game playing that goes on with legalese. If you, I can't remember it all from perfect recall right now, but I've listened to a ton of experts speak on this before, where the Knesset, which is the Israel's Congress, they play a lot of games with how they write legislation around rights and who gets termed as a citizen or not. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a lot of game playing. A lot of it is geographic, mm-hmm. which on its face is like, borderline a war crime itself. The fact that you're taking huge chunks of your population and literally stripping citizenship from them, it's completely undemocratic. It goes against the UN Charter. Yep. It goes against literally, like, they're breaking like virtually every international law on a continuous basis for decades mm-hmm. now. And it's just getting more and more heightened. But no, I want to keep hitting back on that. Like, when we see the level of destruction that's happening in this country, in the occupied areas, we can't get caught up in the insane propagandic language that we see in our media, because what they're doing is they're essentially, a lot of them are just stenographers for Israeli media. Like, they're not, a lot of them aren't actually doing critical reporting on this. You see a lot of these words like conflict or war, or you can't apply those terms to things that are this lopsided. That's not what's happening here. Mm-hmm. These are massacres that are happening. Yep. Okay. And at the end of the day, if we're going to continue on at this level where we just have our Congress, our presidents, our courts not press the issue on these things internationally, this is going to come back and bite these people. This isn't something that's sustainable. It's just not. It's something that, like what we referred to before, where we were talking about Iran and the tensions between the West and Russia and all this, and we're coming out of that cooling off, that freezing time from coronavirus, and I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of this. Ukraine and Russia, Pakistan and India. You're going to start seeing more of these things inflame, because at the end of the day, all those right-wing dictators that were there 4 years ago are still fucking there. As long as these people exist, we were talking about it offline earlier. It's interesting to me how, this is Netanyahu's playbook. He's just calling the same plays over and over again. He has an issue forming a coalition government, and he intensifies the pressure on Palestinians. That seems to be his only calling card to try to gain more support. There's I've seen breakdowns where there's clear popular opinion rate. He gets boosts in his opinion polling, in the months after these events happen. Yeah. You know what I mean? So there's a clear correlation there. He understands this. They have analysts. You know what I mean? So it's just frustrating to watch American media continue on with, and you see some, you got Bernie, you got the squad, there's a couple dozen people in the House that are trying to give voice to this, but in all honesty, guys, it gets drowned out because the complicit language with which our media reports on these things with. Yeah. Because that's ultimately who the American people that don't have deep knowledge on this, that aren't going to go read an article about the history of Israeli-Palestinian conflict, all they're going to hear is their favorite talking head on TV use this muted language, the same way that those same talking heads, until last summer, would talk about police violence in America. This muted language. And that's a barrier that, we talk about media literacy, that it's something that, what do you do about it? What are you going to do? Because you have all these people who are looking at the news and the world events with an amateurish lens and just imbibing what they're being told without critical thought. And this isn't even really something you need to know that much about, to just be oh, this is pure genocidal colonialism. This isn't really anything else. There's no other way to come out at looking at this unless you have some biased bent. I don't have any bias. I don't know. I literally don't know a Palestinian person. I don't know. I don't know if I've ever met one. I've never been to Palestine. My fucking uncle's not Palestinian. I can just look at this clear and be oh, this is just wild colonialism. Gone, just completely state sanctioned in our face, in a country that claims they're a democracy in the year of 2021, and the entire West is just cool with it.
Right. And as well as that is okay, what's an answer to this? How, people talk about the 1 and 2 state solution. I think Trump kind of took that off the table when he, took Jerusalem off the table, put the capital there. That marginalized Palestinian leadership. It, while at the same time strengthening Hamas. Something to note with all this as well is everything that you see right now, if you really feel like Hamas, which they are, they're a militant, quote unquote terrorist organization. All of this is just having their recruitment done for them. It's the easiest form of recruitment. I can tell you right now that if I was a Palestinian, and I've said it to you, if I was a Palestinian living through all this in Palestine, I'm seeing my brothers and sisters and family members and friends, die at the hands of these, really needless bombs into civilian areas. I'm seeing the occupation on the streets, motherfuckers with guns having carte blanche to walk in and out of areas. What's to say I wouldn't take up arms? I mean, what's to say any of us wouldn't take up arms against this? Because they have nothing. What else is there to do at that point? They don't have any peace within all of this. They don't have, I mean, we talk about the blockades that have happened there. We've talked about, just how they're seen within that. And we're talking about a very fucking small region as well. Like, I want to say, I don't know offhand, but like the population density within this area is incredible as well.
Yeah.
So, we know how densely populated places can get when there's a fight for resources. And just some of the tactics that the Israelis have done, not only right now, but over the fucking years. Like I said, there's no fucking way that if I was there and I was amongst all that, it'd be very hard for me to say, okay, we can peacefully negotiate our way to a better life for me and my family. Because, I mean, what is there? I'm sure there's no relief coming from Israelis, or at least this regime. They're not taking the foot off the gas.
Another important piece of context. Yeah. I'm sorry.
No.
I was going to say another important piece of context is too, folks. Like, for people who don't know, like, folks in Gaza are blockaded by Egypt on one side and Israel on the other. There's nowhere to go. So there isn't it's not like, oh, I'll just be a refugee. No, you can't fucking leave.
Right.
And I'm sure some people do. Like, they probably have, what's it called? Like, what are the banditos or whatever they call them? I forget what they call them on the Mexican border. That
coyotes.
Smuggle people. Coyotes. Yeah. But the thing is, at the end of the day, like, if you're talking about, say, for example, a family whose husband went off and fought in Hamas because his brother got killed and he went and fought, and then it's just the mom left with like 4 kids. Like, let's keep it real here, folks. Like, you're putting these people's backs against the wall. And just like what Patter's saying, in another piece of context, like Gaza's an open air prison. They have no control over their electricity. I think that they've had, they're reduced to, they have like 16-hour rolling blackouts now, which is an increase of 20% of what it used to be. They've increased that, Israel has. They have full control over their electrical grid, clean water. All of these things are being slowly reduced over time. Mm-hmm. Like, if you can't look at this, this is literally textbook genocide. Mm-hmm. There is no other way to describe this. You can call it ethnic cleansing, but the problem with calling it just ethnic cleansing and leaving it there is it leaves out the fact that ethnic cleansing typically, like, for example, it's one step before. Like, when you literally capture people and don't give any opportunity, typically, for example, like Viktor Orban or a bunch of these other Eastern European right-wingers, like, ethnic cleansing typically leaves the opportunity for people to fucking leave because the whole point is you just want them gone. Mm-hmm. This is purely genocide. Mm-hmm. They're not letting a lot of these people leave. Okay? So I don't want to hear any more of this equivocation. It's just, it's honestly just, it's disgusting to me. It's disgusting to me because America's own history of doing this exact shit, supporting regimes that just killed people wantonly, but typically those were for political reasons.
Right.
Some of them were for, ethnic reasons mixed in, but it was, communism. But now we're not even talking about that. We're just talking about straight up, like, you're the wrong color. And I feel like that's another thing that gets lost in this, where you have a big part of the reason why in our own politics, at least the Democratic Party, you see a lot of consternation with coming out hard against this stuff. I don't know if you saw the story recently. Andrew Yang came out and didn't really have a hard stance against what Israel's doing. AOC criticized him, and walked it back. But the reason that exists, folks, is because we're still living in this hangover where there is real anti-Semitism in the world, right?
Yeah.
So if you pair that with the fact that you have Jews globally who are still suffering from the same issues that they had, during the whole Holocaust, prior to the Holocaust, anti-Semitism was a wild issue. You go back and listen to read any writer. Fucking Marx was writing about it back in the day. This has been an issue for millennia. Right. Okay. But at the end of the day, if we can't keep in context that, no, this is a nation state, we're criticizing Israel here. This isn't about Jews necessarily. Mm-hmm. That context isn't what matters, because when we're talking about these legal frameworks that are being used, we're talking about a sovereign state wielding its power and its influence to silence critics around the world and wrap themselves in the cloak of anti-Semitism. BB does it all the time. We referred it to it a few episodes ago. You saw it happen to Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. You saw it happen to Bernie Sanders, who is Jewish.
Yeah.
This shit gets used so cynically. Right. And to be honest with you, I blame a lot of these lefties who are afraid to be bold on it, because it allows that creeping, it allows the cynical people who will call out anti-Semitism when all you're trying to do is discuss a genocide.
Right.
And won't let that have any oxygen and be a real conversation. And it's so frustrating.
And, I think everything we've just talked about is obviously super important. And, there's innocent Israelis living in Israel who are caught up in amongst all this as well. There's no doubt about it. But we know who's disproportionately getting affected by this. The UN said yesterday or the day before, more than 200 homes and 24 schools in Gaza have been destroyed or severely damaged in Israeli raids over the past 5 days. It also said residents' access to fresh water is limited, power cuts and damage to pipe networks, increased blackouts, all of those things. Do you think any of those things are getting fixed tomorrow or next month or the month after that? So even when the dust, pardon the pun, settles on all this, what is there left for these people to pick up after all that? And an important thing you said there is, as the world looks at this, could you imagine another scenario where you had a predominantly or, out and out white area of the world, maybe the size of Gaza, that was under attack from, let's say, a black and brown country? Do you think the world would have that same view as to what was going on right now? Absolutely not.
No way.
Do you think the media will be writing it the same way? Fuck no. So, there's definitely a bunch of fucking racism wrapped up in all this as well. And, as towards what solutions there is to all this, I honestly have no idea. I have no idea. My heart just bleeds for these people. Because, again, where do they go from here? Even if the bombing stops tonight, even if Israel turn on their heels and go home and say, all right, we'll leave them off for now, what are they picking up? I'm sure the fucking occupation will continue. I'm sure settlements will continue. So what can be done? What can the international community do? Is it something that, Palestine and Palestinians just have to say, even though this is their religious home, it's, everything they believe in, it's their holy sites, it's all of that. What are they to do? It's very, very hard. It's very hard to comprehend where we're at with all this. And I really think that it is coming to a point now where, the world can no longer turn away. And something I said to you, I think for so long, countries like France, the UK, the US, Belgium, the reason that they never, and I'm talking their political heads, never condemned what Israel have done is because they'd have to then stare at their own imperialism and colonialism that they had marauded across the world for years and years and years in the face. And they just weren't prepared to do that. So it would be an instance of the pot calling the kettle black if they were to say Israel shouldn't do that or give those Palestinians a break. Because they'd have to rectify their own fucking past.
And also, we can't forget, the global, military strategy of all this is the fact that Israel serves as a lodestone for Muslim terrorism. Yeah. They would rather have it focused there. Again, it goes back to this cynical stance on all this, where we talked about in past episodes, the evangelical doomsday prophecy, where a lot of these people who are religious leaders in these countries we're talking about Israelis are just a fucking human shield to suck up Muslim jihad.
Yep.
That is people, right wingers literally say this shit.
Yeah.
They literally say this shit. I can't remember who the pastor was. Trump brought some American pastor to Israel to meet with Netanyahu, and apparently he was quoted exactly saying what I just said, where he was basically
his name was Rich Jeffries was his name.
Yeah, I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the quote exactly. But he basically said like that, like he like said the prophecy to him, to his face.
Right.
And the thing is, that's what's so frustrating. The fact that like Netanyahu will wield anti-Semitism when it's like he will rub shoulders with literal anti-Semites just for the sake of him being to execute his political agenda. Okay? Like it's so out in the open and obvious for anyone who wants to like take a couple minutes and connect these super big ass dots that are right in front of their face. That's what makes it so frustrating. And it's just like, I mean, it really is just like you said, like it's Western countries not having to don't want to come to terms with their own histories of colonialism. And again, not like, you know, like we talked about before, like you know, a lot of these Western countries that do support Israel in this way, or at the very least don't say anything, you know, just complicit by silence, they get the benefit from leaving this kind of a model on the table because neocolonialism still does exist.
Yeah.
Okay. So just because America is not invading countries still, or the UK is not, I mean, America still is, but like overtly and like taking land and shit. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean that you can't still like, oh no, just like you said, there's plenty of crossover between Israeli organizations, corporations, and America and vice versa. It still leaves an open avenue for Western investment. This is the last game in town right here
over there
to let countries like Israel do shit like this, where it's like, okay, well, this is the last frontier for real pure colonialism in the sense of 18th century colonialism. This is the last, like the last vestige of it, because even in Africa, you can't get away with shit like this. And that's really a shocking thing, is because again, it's purely, in my opinion, it's that shield of people being afraid of being called an anti-Semite that literally it halts a ton of movement that would happen on the world stage. Like you said, the UN has decried a ton of this, but at the end of the day, like the UN means nothing when countries like America and Israel will be like, yeah, I don't give a fuck. I don't care about ICC rulings. Who cares? Who's the Hague? Who is it? I'll put sanctions on them. Trump was threatening international organizations. And sure, Biden's not doing it anymore. But what people have to recognize is when significant superpowers in the world start taking shits on these international organizations that used to have power post-World War II, it weakens them across the board, because it makes dictators in other countries, you know, African countries, Eastern Europe, it makes them feel like it's okay. And then they do it. And the thing is, it's just like what happened with like our riots and stuff last year in our country. What happens is if everybody just stops agreeing that there's power there, there is no power there anymore. Right. And that's what is happening here, folks. That's what's happening in real time. We're watching all of these post-World War II institutions that were created to stop things like exactly like this from happening have no more effective power on the world stage. That's what we're seeing, because at the end of the day, who's got the guns? That's all this shit keeps coming down to anymore. There is no more decorum around civilizational respect of sovereign nations or peoples. All that shit is out the window. Right. It really is. You know, it really is. And it's a sad thing to see.
And the irony as well is, like, if all these people who are saying, you know, the Jews in this region have the divine right and the sovereign right to reclaim their land, those same people over here who are saying that better get off their land and let the Native Americans come back and take theirs, because it's the fucking exact same thing. So you're a fucking hypocrite if you're saying that. But yeah, I don't really have anything more to say on this. I mean, I think we could give instances and examples. I mean, I had a video queued up. Let's play it just for. Well, first of all, let's see if I can figure it out how to play it. But all right, let me see if you can see it. Possibly, no. Forget about it, because I can't figure it out. But
I think there is one more thing that you touched on that I do want to take a little stab at. You were saying, what's the solution? I wouldn't call it a solution, but you know, we talked about it in pre-production, where you have Abbas, who's the leader of Hamas. if there is any solution out of this, the only hope that I see, other than like a complete reversal from the United States, which I don't see that happening. I don't. And even if the United States did rescind funding, military fund aid, and all this other stuff, would it stop? I don't think so. But what I do see, as far as, because the only way out here, folks, is we are in the 21st century. The fact that we have video footage of all these civilian buildings being bombed, which by definition are war crimes, by the way. Like, there is no excuse. It doesn't matter if, yeah, it doesn't matter if, like, oh, someone fired, even if someone did fire a rocket from like the fucking 8th floor, you can't level an apartment complex. And they were like, oh, we dropped leaflets or whatever and warned people we were going to bomb this building in an hour. That doesn't mean anything.
Don't mean shit.
You can't do that. It's literally against international law. They're attacking power grids, all this other shit. It's all illegal. But anyway, the only way that I see, like, strategically, like, what is the play here? You have to make a sympathy play on the world stage. And as long as this guy Abbas is in power and he gets to be that foil for Netanyahu, where he's been in power for, about a decade. He's halted elections. They were supposed to have elections in January. He halted them. As long as this guy's still in, and don't get me wrong, like, just like you said, I understand it. Like, this isn't me being like, oh, he shouldn't be doing. No, I get it. Like, you're gonna have resistance groups pop up when shit like this happens, and it's not about who's justified or not. Just like what I said with our issues that we had last summer. Like, no, they're gonna happen. It's just a fact. That's how it's gonna go. But the only play I can see in the long term is if they can have a democratic election and hopefully have the foresight to see, like, this isn't sustainable. We're just gonna get genocide. We're being genocided, and it's going to continue as long as we leave a person who believes violence is the only solution to this, which, again, I get why people think that, because it's been going on for so long. But if you can't make that sympathy play, think about people like Gandhi, think about people like Martin Luther King. They were both in untenable situations where violence was never going to solve it. Black folks in America didn't have civil rights. Them grouping together and forming militias and stuff wouldn't have solved it. The American military would have just smoked them. What did they do instead? They chose to...
Civil disobedience.
I have to put my own body on the line, like Buddhist monks self-immolating in Vietnam.
I refuse to participate in what you're trying to do.
Yeah, that honestly is the only course left, because if they're going to continue to cynically play this, and again, our own State Department has made statements. We didn't pull that video up where they're basically like, Israel has the right to self-defense. That's all anyone in the West is going to keep saying. Then you have no other play than to just, we have to just stop and let the massacre be seen for what it is and hope to God that someone will step in and do something.
Yeah.
Because you can't win this fight.
No.
The technological military imbalance, the economics, the resources, it's insane.
And it's past the point of no return in terms of even it being a fight. You know what I mean?
Right.
That fight, if it was going to be a proper war, would have had to have happened without interference from anybody. Would have happened to happen 30 years ago, and it's just not, because it's been minimized so much now. First of all, it's not a fair fight, and nobody wants to see the continuing bloodshed that's going on right now. But as I said before, a famous Irish song, all the people looking at Hamas and looking at the people of Gaza right now and the people who are taking up arms there, a famous Irish song says, "You dare to call me a terrorist as you look down your gun." Are those people that you see, who have had enough and are taking up arms against what's happening to them? Are those people terrorists? Are they freedom fighters? And this type of language that I'm spewing right now is seen, I guess, as testy language, just because I'm kind of looking at it from the purview of those people who've been blockaded, who've been bombarded, who've seen the death and destruction. What's the answer for them now at this point? And I agree. I'd agree with you. I think that by doing that, if they are drawn to that, I don't think that's going to get the answer that they're looking for. But when you talk about just being all out of things that you think you can do, is there relief in the death or the martyrdom that would come from that? Then possibly. When you have, members of your family, the majority of your family dead from rockets and I don't know, man. It's a tough one, and I'm sure we'll see more play out over the next few days, and I'm more so interested in listening to what the international community has to say, and I'm not so much what Joe Biden has to say. And I want to see what the international community says, and I want to see sanctions against Israel. If I'm quite honest, I want to see proper sanctions against Israel by countries. I want countries to pull out their ambassadors, and I want to see sort of that sort of action and see if that moves the needle. See if that stops the thing. And even the most basic thing of, stopping evictions on 28 families. 28 families. You're not talking about, these people have nothing left at that point. That's what they have in that region, a home. And like you said, it's almost like a form of there's people, running there from Jews from all over the world, coming there to see if they can lay claim to land in these areas. Unreal. Absolutely unreal. Yep. I have nothing more to say on this, because the more I talk about it, the more I'm fucking getting heated. I need to go make dinner and try think about something that I can affect right now. And
I would just amend that song to "You Dare Call Me a Terrorist" from the seat of your bulldozer.
Right.
I think that's probably more
apropos.
Yeah.
But this was episode 14, Foreign and Domestic Unfiltered. There's quite a lot that we can discuss in the next couple of weeks, I think. We touched on the Matt Gaetz thing, and that's going to develop a little bit more. Maybe we'll have some more info for our next quick hit, or maybe a main topic. As things open up, I've heard constant talk of inflation, which I'm sure you have. But, we've seen the gas crisis. Some funny images coming out with that. But yeah, we're gonna try pop on a few midweek sessions as well, like Ramona's been doing. Now that we can do this and continue to perfect this, I think this is a nice way for us to be able to, give you visuals of what we're talking about more fluidly. And the more I start tripping over myself with actually managing this broadcast, I think we can get better at the presentation of it as well. But as always, anyone who joins the stream, please subscribe, support the channel. We love the discussion. If anybody has any rebuttals to anything that we've said today, please let us know.
Them up.
We're ready. We're ready to block you and delete your comment. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, please do. I enjoy the discourse. I think it's healthy. I don't think anybody should be really silenced. I think it's important to know what everyone has to say. And it's important as a viewer to look at what everyone has to say and come up with an opinion of your own from it. Other than that, thanks for joining. Ramon, anything else to say to the peeps?
Nope. Like you said, keep an eye out for the midweek stream. Try to do a better job of announcing it. It's just, with our schedules and stuff, we got trying to match them up. It gets a little difficult, but we're going to try to do a better job on that. So you guys have a better heads up if you want to catch the live streams. As always, we'll try to keep everything in podcast format as well. So it's still on the anchor.fm page. Everything will still be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that. And don't forget, there are, I believe it is the 18th is the Schenectady school board election. And I think that the city council election is in June, right? That's later down the road, correct? June. Okay, so we're going to have more coverage of all that coming up too. We're going to try to keep a focus on the local politics. We're going to have more interviews and guests on to come up soon. So keep an ear out for that as well.
Awesome. All right, folks, have a lovely remainder to the week. It's supposed to be nice weather, at least in this region over the weekend, so get out and enjoy it. I think we've seen the last of the cold days, thank God.